republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming tonight. First order of business is public comment. We will receive oral communications from members of the public. Members of the public may address the select board for up to 3 minutes, longer with the permission of the chair. The select board shall not engage in discussion on topics raised during public comment, but may choose to add the topic to a future agenda. This agenda segment will be limited to 15 minutes unless extended at the discretion of the chair. Do we have any public comment tonight? Seeing none. We're going to move on to grants, gifts, and donations. We have a Mass DEP Sustainable Materials Recovery Program, which is SMRP Recycling Dividends Program Award of $1,225.
Motion to accept.
Second.
Any discussion on that? Leslie, this was the one that we mentioned last time.
Right.
Do we know how we're gonna spend it?
No, that, I think you and I brought up the subject, and Tracy and Alicia and everybody else didn't know, but it was because Kristen puts out a, okay,
That's just a copy of it. The Board of Health hasn't met. They'll have to
Gotcha.
determine
Yeah.
how they're gonna spend it.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Executive Office of Public Safety and Security, EOPSS, the Department of Fire Service, DFS, fiscal year 25 firefighter safety equipment grant award of $15,500.
Motion to accept.
Second, is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion on this one? Chief, did you want to speak to this at all, or?
I can if you'd like me to. It's, come on. So this is the continuation of the process we started last year. We were lucky enough to get, this is the second time within, the year that we were awarded the 15.5. It's just a continuation on trying to keep our guys safe, our members safe by, making sure we meet the standard for the turnout gear.
Great,
So, yes.
thank you.
is this a federal grant or is it a state?
This is a state grant. This is a state grant, yes.
Yeah, it's
We
not-
have 2 other grants in process right now through the state, safe grants for working with the Council on Aging and also with the schools. We just haven't heard back from the state on those yet, so
Great,
we're working on it.
Got a pretty good grant writer.
We do, we work real well.
Good.
nice
job.
bringing a lot
Thank
of
you.
money, well
Thank you.
done. Thank you.
Chief.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, under new business, we have the Housing Production Plan. It's a presentation by Ian Burns from MVPC. Woody, the chair of the planning board is here. Do you want to speak first?
I'm just gonna introduce Ian.
Okay.
The planning board's been working hard on the 6 warrant articles and on the housing production plan. It's been in the works for over a year and a half. And they've been working with MVPC and Ian's got a slideshow for you guys. And I'll turn it over to Ian Burns. Thank you, Ian.
Thank you, Woody.
Thank you, Woody.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here with you all. Again, my name is Ian Burns with the Merrimack Valley Planning Commission. I oversee the community and economic development team over there. Over the past, really 2 years now, we've been working with each city and town across the Merrimack Valley to update their housing production plan. This is a state guided plan that I'll explain in a little bit what it all means, but it's been a great process. In Newbury, we've gone through several public sessions and had some great meetings with the planning board, and so we're glad to be here tonight looking for final adoption of the plan from the select board. So I'm going to do a brief presentation. I cut it down a bit from what we did with the planning board to kind of give you a summary. I believe you all should also have a copy of the plan to review, but I'll do a quick overview and we can go right to the next slide here. So a housing production plan itself, if you are not familiar with the term, it really is established by Massachusetts general law. However, they're mostly optional for communities to adopt. Although they are optional, they provide additional incentives if you have a housing production plan in place. So on top of it helping you plan for low and moderate income housing needed in the community, they help you develop a strategy to add affordable housing units. And the plans themselves, if adopted by a local community, can offer a pathway to what we call safe harbor under Chapter 40B. Some of you are probably familiar with 40B, which is the state law that allows developers to override local zoning if you have not enough affordable housing in your community. However, with a housing production plan, if you have a plan in place and then you produce a small amount of affordable units every year, you can receive safe harbor before you reach that state mandated minimum of 10% of your housing stock being designated as affordable. That's a lot of jargon in terms I'm happy to break down if folks are unfamiliar, but it really is just another pathway. So as you're establishing more affordable housing, you can get closer to your goal and have safe harbor from a 40B development in the process. Yeah.
Can you explain to me what that exactly means, safe harbor?
Yeah, so safe harbor is when you can deny a comprehensive permit. So when a developer wants to build affordable housing in the community, if you don't have 10% of your housing stock designated as affordable, then they can override local zoning and build it anywhere they want, essentially.
Right.
And you essentially have to issue them the permit to do that. If you have a housing production plan in place and you're producing affordable units to get you closer to that 10% goal, you can deny a comprehensive permit, a permit that comes forward from a developer in the process.
Because you have a plan.
Because you have a plan and because you're making progress towards the 10%. You have to have both. So this is the first step, the plan, and then once you start making progress, you can get that certification that you can deny a comprehensive permit, yeah.
Thank you. Dana?
You said anywhere they want,
Within,
but I guess my question is things have to happen first, so that this particular developer would have to own the property.
Right.
So it would have to be purchased.
right, what I mean is a land.
And it would be known ahead of time whether we are in safe harbor or not.
Right,
Even before he buys the property.
right, correct.
So it seems to me like a lot would have to happen for a developer to come in, buy a chunk of Newbury, have us not in safe harbor, and then just start building whatever he wanted. And can he build whatever he wanted at that point?
Well, that recently happened at the end of Pearson Drive.
What's that?
That recently happened at the end of Pearson Drive. We had
Yeah,
that.
to answer your question, yeah.
Absolutely can happen.
The Cricket Lane project?
Yes.
Yeah.
In addition to that process of what we refer to as safe harbor, a housing production plan and the process we went through here in Newbury and in all the communities across the region we work in was not only to talk about how are you adding units to get to that goal of 10% that I'm referencing in 40B, but also just what are generally the housing needs across the community and how can we individualize this plan so it addresses not just what the state is saying housing goals should be, but what do you really need here and what can we do to make sure that your residents have access to the housing they need. So we kind of took a deep dive into the data for the town and looked at the housing stock that exists and compared that to what the current demographics and demographic trends are looking at to be able to say, okay, here's what might be the right fit for town here. We did that here in Newbury and like I said, across the region. So we wanted to do a localized spin to it and hopefully you can see a little bit of that throughout the plan. So you can go to the next slide there.
Ian, can I ask a question and maybe Martha might answer also, because it's so local? In Newbury, do we have restrictions on floor heights, meaning how many floors we can go up for a 40B? Could we build a 8-story building for 40B now in Newbury? And if we can or can't, does the transit area allow that kind of condensed development? So it's 2 questions.
So I'll start by saying that the MBTA communities districts,
And
as
then
I
does the safe
believe you're
harbor
referring
protect
to.
us from that? Is like,
Yeah.
that's what I'm trying to tie it up to.
So those transit districts do not allow for that height in them. They have a height restriction. I think we ended up with 3 stories and maybe 2.5 in some places. Yeah. In terms of the height that a developer could build under a 40B, they can't just build literally anything they want. It still has to adhere to what is appropriate for the site. So they go through a process with the state. I'm not an expert in every step they have to take with the state, but they can't just build a tower and drop it there. They go through an iterative process to get that approval. And typically they're the scale of what the other developments are in the area. So in a place like Newbury, I wouldn't imagine that a 40B would be 6 stories. They'd probably aim to keep it at 3 stories or below.
But my
from what we see.
question really would, without trying to, I'm not trying to put you on the
Yeah,
spot
it's
at
fine.
all. But they could with a 40B enablement. So something like this housing plan could make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
If you start to, unless people want that kind of development.
Yeah, there's always, I guess, an outsized chance. I can't never say never, but
So
that's why it's important to do this planning and have that protection potentially in place. So some of you might be aware that the town already had a housing production plan. These expire after 5 years. So the last one was approved in 2019 and expired in 2024, which is why we're doing this process again. This planning process began in 2023 in collaboration with the planning department. We had a couple public engagement sessions throughout the process, even more than what's listed on there. So we of course had a virtual session on Zoom, and we had an in-person session with residents where we really brainstormed potential goals for the housing production plan process. We also had several planning board meetings, so we presented to the plan back in November to the planning board, and that was open to the public, and their ongoing conversations in December and January were also open to the public. I will say at the same time this was happening, as you all know, we were also going through the MBTA communities process in Newbury, so there was almost 2 housing initiatives happening at the same time. Naturally, those conversations gelled in a lot of our meetings, so we did have, during that MBTA communities process, we heard feedback about housing that we were able to incorporate in the housing production plan, where some feedback might not fit with the MBTA communities piece, but we were like, let's save that and hold it for when it comes time for the plan. So there's some advantage there when we did some public engagement with MBTA to be able to incorporate it here. So these are the actual plan contents. Like I said, you all have a copy. I'm not gonna go in detail in each chapter here tonight. I just wanna give you a quick highlight from each chapter so that you can see exactly what it looks like. But the state has a brief outline for what they require in each housing production plan. So we're required to do a demographic profile and local housing conditions. That's called a housing needs assessment for the state. Then we're also required to list some housing production strategies and areas in the community where it might make sense to have additional housing stock given the recommendations that come out of the plan. So we'll work through that a little bit in this presentation. So I'll just show, I think it's 2 or 3 data charts, and I think you all have seen maybe some of this before in some of the other presentations I've been to the planning board or here before. But a few key points. Number 1 are the demographic projections for the community. So this is the age distribution projections, and this is looking at the percentage makeup of each age cohort over the next few decades in the community. The big takeaway here, Newbury, like many of the other communities, is that blue line that you can see sharply increase, and then it does kind of level off in future decades, but that's your 65 plus population. So we are seeing a significant increase in adults over 65 here in Newbury and also in the region. So we want to think about how we accommodate for that changing demographic. What's important with this is thinking about the fact that this is a projection based off of current trends and current demographic trends. So if you continue doing the same thing that we've been doing for the past 10 or 20 years, this is what the projection is. There are changes, of course, that can happen in the community that would cause those to vary over time. So when we think about your housing stock, we think about, okay, we see a dip in that green line, your under 20 population. A healthy community is a growing community and has a future generation in it. So how can we make sure that we have maybe a steady flow, or at least hold steady your under 20 population, so that you have kids in the next generation in town, and then we think about what housing stock is needed for that. So that's some of the tools that go into this thinking when we look at demographic projections. This chart's a little small, so I'll just explain it to you. This is the housing unit occupancy versus what the actual size of the housing unit is. For this chart, what we want to see is, are people what we call potentially overhoused? And when I say overhoused, I don't mean that everybody wants to leave their house if it's too big for them, but we know that in some cases we have folks that are maybe empty nesters, their kids have moved out of their house, they're in a 4-bedroom home, it might be a 1 or 2 person couple living there, and they might want to downsize, but there may be very few options in the community to do so. What this chart looks at is how many people are living in the units and how big are those housing units themselves. So on the left, that purple and orange slice there is 4 or more person households and 3-person households. So you can see that's about 60%, or that's about 28% of the households there. And then on the right, you have the size of those households, the 4+ bedrooms and the 3 bedrooms, purple and orange again. If you line up those colors, you can see there's a lot more of the larger homes than there are of the larger families. So the colors are corresponding there. And then on the right, the blue and yellow is corresponding to small housing units and small occupancy. The left is the occupancy. There's a lot of people, a lot of 2-person households, but not as many 2-bedroom units that you can see on the right there. So what that's showing us is that there may be intense competition for those smaller units in town if some adults or empty nesters are looking to downsize. I say that knowing full well that there are plenty of folks that want to stay in their house even after their kids move out, so we expect a bit of a mismatch. But when we see something that large, that suggests to us that there's a good amount of competition for small units in town, and we want to find a way to encourage options for downsizing should folks want to look for that. The final data point that we have in here is cost burden. What we look at here is, are people paying too much for their housing than they can probably afford? Newbury is in a unique situation like some of our small towns where the top line there are renters in the community. On the right, that brown section of the bar is what we call not computed. Because there's so little census data for renters in the community, you have a large margin of error for Newbury. So we're not shocked to see that there was a lot of either non-responses there to the census question or some margin of error because there's so few renters to begin with. But what this tells us is some general trends in the community of how folks are paying for their housing and if they can afford it. The middle bar is your overall occupants in town, households in town, and the bottom bar are your owners. And we see generally 30% of all households and 30% of owners are cost burdened, which means they're paying more than 30% of their income on housing. So that's your gross income too, that's your pre-tax income. When you're spending more than 30% of it, that means you're not then spending that money out in your local economy, at your local shops or restaurants, that sort of thing. So that flags to us that folks may be burdened in the amount that they're paying. And when we see that 30%, that's a high number in terms of the households in a community. So just a summary to bring that all together, what we're looking at here in the community is maybe a potential for both population decline and an increase in the over 65 population, a decrease in your under 20 population, lack of housing options both for new residents moving in and smaller homes for adults to downsize to, and thinking about how all those demographics can interplay with your housing needs in the community. I'm going to skip right on to the next section and talk a little bit about what the rest of the plan shows for context and recommendations. In the plan itself, we break down what is called housing development constraints. So that is factors like environmental factors, infrastructure, regulatory considerations. We don't do a full-scale analysis of here's your current sewer capacity and here's how much more you can take in. What we do is we say, okay, there's no public sewer in these areas, there's no access to public sewer in these areas. This has to be considered when you think about the potential for more housing here. So we know that with such limited opportunities for hookup to public infrastructure, you're naturally going to be constrained with your housing options. So that all factors into when we think about recommendations and what's actually feasible in the community for potential more housing options. That goes along right with your environmental constraints. About half of the eastern side of town is marshland, and so when you're thinking about what can actually be built, how can we make sure we both protect what exists today in the marshland, Plum Island, those sorts of areas, and then what are the areas that could maybe see more development while making sure we're protecting those places out there. So that's part of the discussion. What we do is cite some other plans the town has gone through to keep in mind things like your hazard mitigation plan the process that you went through there, and so we can look at the environmental factors to be aware of. And so lastly, this is just a summary of each strategy itself. As you'll see in the plan, there's a full breakout matrix of potential first steps for housing production strategies and detailed paragraphs under each of these for how you can implement and how you might want to think about implementation. The top 5 strategies that came away from this process, number 1 is actually already underway, reviewing and modifying the existing accessory dwelling unit bylaw. That process started a few months ago with the planning board. We started this strategy production before we knew exactly how the new state law would shape up. But your ADU bylaw looking at allowing for additional options for homeowners to build accessory dwelling units, and that will, I believe, be coming to your town meeting this fall for that change. So I'm sure you'll be hearing more about that soon.
Spring, actually.
Spring, sorry. I'm getting my seasons confused here. The next one, exploring the feasibility of an inclusionary zoning bylaw. What this refers to is requiring multifamily development to incorporate a certain percentage of units as affordable. So what we see in other communities is that when they build, let's say 50 units of multifamily housing, the community requires 10% of those to be set aside as affordable. So that could be 5 affordable units set aside, or maybe it's 15%, maybe it's 20%. In Newbury, we've actually secured a grant in partnership with the town to study this and see if it'd be appropriate to adopt an inclusionary zoning bylaw and mandate developers to include affordable units should they build in somewhere like the MBTA Communities District or elsewhere, or if there's multifamily housing built in town. Number 3, establish an affordable housing trust. So the town currently does not have an affordable housing trust. That's not rare for small towns. However, a lot of the neighboring communities in the region that might be a little bit bigger do have affordable housing trusts. What these are an additional option and board made up of residents that can distribute funds for the use of different housing programs, things like down payment assistance programs for residents. Those can be funded through a variety of ways. Number 1 is they're often funded through an inclusionary zoning bylaw, like I mentioned earlier. As part of those bylaws, you can have a developer pay into an affordable housing trust if they're coming into town. Affordable Housing Trust, we also mention are often paid for through some other programs like CPA, which I know has been a discussion in the past here in town, but isn't currently. But we mentioned in the plan that has been what other communities have used to fund an affordable housing trust and be able to distribute funds to the community in order to have programs available to residents to access housing they can afford. Number 4 is what we refer to as right-sized housing. This goes back to those smaller units that I was discussing earlier. There's a couple models that we mention in the plan itself as to how the community could encourage additional small housing types. A key one that we mention is a new program called 40Y. This is a new chapter of Massachusetts law that allows communities to adopt a zoning district. It's an optional zoning district, but it allows them to adopt a zoning district called a starter home zoning district or right-size zoning district. And that zoning district would mandate that if a developer came in, they would have to build smaller scale, potentially detached single-family homes instead of just large, maybe $1.5 or $2 million McMansions in a typical subdivision, but we could encourage and require and incentivize even developers to build smaller scale, detached single-family homes that could be accessible to first-time home buyers or accessible to folks downsizing. That program is really key because if communities adopt a zoning district, the state will actually provide incentive payments to communities for adopting that zoning. And on top of that, the state will pay communities incentive payments for every unit that is then built within that zoning district. We're tracking that closely to see if it'd be something viable for Newbury to explore, but we think it could be a good option for that right-size housing. And then finally, we talk a lot about community engagement and education. We saw during this housing production plan process and during the MBTA communities process that a lot of residents were eager to learn more about housing and ask questions and understand what exactly the need was, if there was a need, if there is a need, how can we address it, what are the tools that we can use. We've seen local advocacy groups crop up in Newbury and in neighboring communities around housing. And so we think there's been some good momentum in town here about education on housing development, and that should really continue so that not only residents are aware of the potential need and solutions to it, but also our local boards and commissions are aware of the need and potential solutions to it as well. I think I'm stopping there. Completion and implementation timeline, so you both have to adopt it. The planning board adopted it, the select board must as well. And then we will send it off to the state. They have to review and approve the plan to make sure it has everything that they requested is incorporated into a housing production plan. And I will end there. Happy to take questions on it. Thank you for your patience as we work through that.
Thank you for going through that.
Good job.
That was very well done. You answered all my questions. Does anybody on the board have any questions?
How does this compare to the other communities that you represent?
Yeah.
As far as like in the middle of the road, the two ends of the roads?
That's a very good question. I would say, unsurprisingly, you're similar to a lot of the smaller rural towns that we're serving. So as a refresher for folks, we work everywhere from Lawrence to Newburyport. And so the like communities with you all, we're with Rowley and West Newbury, Groveland, even those types of cities and towns. The need is pretty much the same in all of those communities. That chart I showed you about the mismatch between the unit size and the number of people living in those households, it looks pretty much the same across the region. When we look at cost burden, that's the one area, that's the bar chart that I showed, that Newbury is doing a little bit better than its neighbors in terms of resident cost burden. And so what we see across the region is that about a quarter to half of all renters are cost burdened, and then we see over a third of all residents are cost burdened. So we see renters are cost burdened at very high levels, but less here so in Newbury versus some of the other communities. The goals are not too dissimilar in this plan from some other communities. What's unique about Newbury, like I said, is that community engagement, the options for pursuing an affordable housing trust, and what I've also noticed in conversations with the planning board is an openness to things like inclusionary zoning and others where there's some momentum already. Other communities are a little bit behind you in that forward-thinking process, I would say, for future changes.
And I think this might be more for us than you, but the strategies, what strategies are we looking at? Like what are we?
There's 5 strategies here that are in this thing here.
Right.
There's
No, I know, I'm familiar with all of them. I'm just wondering, which ones are we looking at adopting? Are we gonna adopt all of them? Are we gonna adopt one? And have we adopted any to this point?
Well, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, once we adopt this housing production plan, the planning board, in conjunction with the select board, will look through I think we are updating, I think that's later on the agenda, the bylaws for the accessory dwelling units. Adopting inclusionary zoning, that's, might be talking about that, but I don't think that's gonna be coming, so this is just a roadmap for the next 5 years, and then in the next 4 years, we start over again with another public discussions and public hearings, and then we do it again for another 5 years. It's like constantly evolving.
Very much like a master plan where you have your goals and you might not accomplish all those strategies over the next 5 years. So that's when we come back and say, what'd you do, what didn't you, and how can we move forward?
But if you, go ahead, sorry.
I would just, now this has got nothing to do with density or anything like that. As far as if a developer comes in, which, the whole density issue is what we're gonna move on to next with the zoning.
Yeah, that's something.
Which is the next topic of discussion. So this has got nothing to do with density or number of units per acre or any of that. Is that correct?
No, correct, yeah.
What I was gonna say is that, I mean, it's obviously important that you have the plan, but you said we have to have performance to the plan. So deciding what strategies to use are pretty important. It's obvious, and I see this whole process is in the best interest for the town of Newbury.
Yeah, it's gonna help us ward off another unfriendly 40B.
So when we accept this, this goes back to the planning board for public hearings and such?
No,
It's already been adopted by the planning board.
we have to adopt this.
Yeah, that's the next one, Jeff.
Yeah.
That's what's a little confusing.
And then it gets submitted to the state.
Good, which is, it's needed, yes.
Yeah, we need to have a housing production plan.
Accessory bylaw, Martha, is still one septic system?
That actually now I think can be 2. Under the new state law, it's
Yeah.
different from
That's
what
what
we had
that's what I
before.
had heard, which makes good sense, otherwise you're spacking everything together. Good.
All right, any other questions?
One more.
Yeah,
The projected population.
Yeah.
Through 2050, it's pretty staggering. Does the state, is the thought process that this, and obviously not this alone, but this is, are we trying to turn that around? Is there a way to turn it around? Do we wanna turn it around?
it's a regional issue, it's not
That's a great
just,
question.
Because to me, it's mind-boggling that our population by 2050 is projected to almost be cut in half, but we need to increase housing.
So regionally, the population is growing, and in eastern Massachusetts as a whole, the population is growing. Newbury and other small towns are seeing a population decline, and that's really a result of the net migration and out-migration of residents both within Massachusetts or around New England or around the country, and also folks aging out of the community and no longer being here anymore, and there's not young families coming in to replace that, and so we see that net decrease.
Cost of housing.
Yes, and that's a huge driver of it, is the cost of housing. And so thinking about, we see it raising everywhere else, the population, why is it declining here, and how can we, like to your point, reverse that trend, because that's concerning for a community
Well,
with
see,
losing
that's
population.
actually was part of my question was do the statistics, because I read all the information, did the statistics assume that when we create affordable housing and we reduce the cost of housing, which I don't know how the heck we're gonna do that in Newbury, but that the population is gonna increase. And another thing that I read in the report that they talk a lot about is commuters. So, which to me, I don't think Newbury's a good example to use that against, because when you look at where you can go in the town of Newbury, to get a job, where you're gonna be in 6 figures, or let's just say $250,000 a year, which is, you know, if you're gonna buy a $900,000 house, and like they talk about just 40 grand, to put 40 grand down
Yeah.
on a $400,000 house for a typical I wanna say middle-aged person is almost impossible to come up with. And then you're getting into PMI and all that other stuff, if you can't put that 10% down. So I have a hard time trying to figure out, and now, I get the cookie, I understand the cookie, you know, the carrot that's being dangled in front of us where we don't wanna be forced into having to put 40A where we don't want it and so on and so forth. To me, that's about the only reason to do this. Because I don't see a need,
To have a housing production plan?
yeah,
Well, then you ask yourself though, Dana, where do you see such onerous potential for this to hurt the town?
I'm sorry, say the question again?
If you look at the perspective that presented, there's not many regulations or goals within that. So where in your mind do you think something like this would hurt the town?
That's a really good question.
So otherwise, meaning that, why bother to get too involved, because it's all gonna work itself out, you know?
Well, but because I think I like to broaden my horizon like out to the state level, and I totally understand. You made a really good, you know, you talked about how, you know, we're kind of a unique situation here in regards to the rest of the state. And I guess the only thing I object to is that the state is trying to take this cookie cutter approach and apply it to everybody, which I just wish maybe there was other options
You know what happens?
with towns that have different demographics, that's all.
You know what happens when you build a 3-bedroom house in the town of Newbury now, and it's $1 million?
Yeah,
That's the driver. So, you know, for me, when we get things like this, and it's always been, because I came from.
but Jeff, they'll sell too.
Well, and because I came from the planning board, you know, with Martha, I did 7 years on the planning board. If it's not injurious to the town and looks like it's information, I keep it kind of dumb and simple, because otherwise you could get lost in this hyperbole.
I understand.
So I kind of want to go back to reframing the whole purpose of having this here. This is a planning tool. That's all this is. It is the Merrimack Valley Planning Commission oversees 15 communities. Is that what you oversee?
Yeah.
15 communities. And they're putting together a regional housing plan. And this, what we're going to vote on tonight, is going to be one chapter in the 15 communities that says this is what we are. And if we don't have a plan and we don't drive our own future the way we want to go, we're like a rudderless ship at sea that's just blowing around.
Well, and I think also, Alicia, the ability to have some safe harbor. Like
Yes,
if a developer came in and was able to finagle a hookup to
Well,
water in Newburyport or something like that,
that's
then
what I
you
mean.
get some serious
By
development.
a rudderless ship, when you don't have a plan and you don't have a path forward, you're gonna be at the mercy of these 40Bs that'll just come in and do whatever. This is, I feel this is very important for the town of Newbury to, is this a requirement by the Commonwealth? I don't, it
It's
might
not
be.
a requirement, it's encouraged, and you get additional points in grant applications if
Yeah.
you have it. And like we mentioned earlier, that protection for 40Bs, but it's not statutorily that you have to have it or else
Okay.
situation.
So it's a best practice. I would hate for somebody to go pull out the Merrimack Valley Planning Regional Housing Plan and just not have the town of Newbury in there. That we don't have a plan, we're just nothing.
Alicia,
Yeah,
can I ask Martha a question?
go ahead.
Martha, and is it Dan?
Yeah,
How are you? Nice to meet you, by the
You
way.
as well.
I'm Jeff. Martha, do you see any real pitfalls for us in this?
Personally, no, not at all. I think it's a benefit, and what it does really is it sort of synthesizes and puts out a lot of the things that we've been talking about in terms of how to encourage different housing options and sizes and,
And get families back to town and, yep, makes sense to me.
right, so, so multi-benefits. One is potential safe harbor if we're able to encourage the additional affordable housing. but also just a roadmap for the town to really start looking at things that we've been talking about inclusionary housing for a long time to try to get some affordable housing in. The accessory apartment bylaw we adopted, we were one of the first communities to adopt that. So, this is a refinement of that, but the Affordable Housing Trust is also something we've been talking about for quite some time, is how to establish that, and that really is a mechanism that can help fund additional housing. So it's all very much in line with issues that we've seen and things that we've been talking about.
The Affordable Housing Trust, though, that's not gonna bring down property values.
No, but it does provide, if you have, and correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, if you have an inclusionary zoning bylaw, for example, and a developer is required to build, 1 unit for every 4 units, that's one affordable unit for every 4 units that's built, there can be a provision that they can do a payment in lieu of doing that, and right now we have no mechanism for a developer to provide a payment, so that could go into an affordable housing trust. Or as Ian was saying, if we had Community Preservation Act, funds could go from that to help us develop some affordable housing, so.
And to your point, it doesn't bring down property values, but then the trust could then disperse, let's say, a down payment assistance program. To your point, how can people afford it? You can then use those trust funds for programs like that to
Yeah.
help people get access to housing in the community.
They're still so expensive, the
It
houses.
is.
I have one more question. Is there any differences between the one we're doing right now and the one that we did in 2018?
Yes.
Can you explain what those differences are?
The most
Quickly.
The most obvious difference, I would say, is the one from 2018 had an extensive list of goals and strategies. I mean, I wanna say there was like 20
It's a lot.
strategies listed in the plan. And when we looked at that, we felt like it was pretty impractical, and a lot of them listed were kind of pie in the sky ideas. So what we did this time around was really try to narrowly tailor those recommendations and say what can be feasibly done over the next 5 years and what fits town versus what we saw 5 years ago was a list of 20 that were seen pretty much in all of our communities and across the state. And so we tried to make that more specific this time around.
And that's it?
That's the most obvious one. I mean, there's
Yeah.
plenty of other things, but that's the easiest one to note, yeah.
So if that was under that plan, what was the production like, the second part of the deal?
That's a good question. I don't know of your actual unit production. We list a couple things at the beginning of this housing production plan of some accomplishments over the last few years in the town. And Martha, maybe you can speak to some of them if you know off the top of your head. But in terms of the actual numbers of affordable units, there wasn't huge production of affordable units, I would say, in the community for the last few years, but you've since permitted some, so.
We have permitted, so we'll be having 6 coming online.
Yeah. But we have a section at the beginning that lists a couple things that were accomplished the past 5 years, yeah.
Okay.
Did I interpret that wrong, that some of the accessory dwelling units would be considered affordable?
So there's small affordable and big affordable. So they could be considered affordable in the sense that they might provide housing that is more affordable than, our large housing, but in order to actually get them to count on our subsidized housing inventory, they have to be deed restricted and go through a process.
Right. And so you can't
That's a great
require, the
question.
homeowner would have to go through that process, which in my opinion is unlikely because it's very arduous to go through that paperwork. And the town cannot require the accessory dwelling units to be to go
Well,
through the
I would
process.
imagine that would open up a bunch of discrimination laws on who you could have I mean, like, let's just call it an in-law apartment. Okay, I only want my mother-in-law living there. Well, once I open up that can of worms of having it go towards a 40A or B or whatever it is, then now I have to let anybody live there. I'm just throwing that out there as, and I don't know if that's true or not, but I can see where people wouldn't wanna do that, so.
Well, it's not gonna be restricted to family members anymore, right?
It's not, our current bylaw doesn't restrict it to family members. And the new one won't either, it actually can't.
Okay, so I'll entertain a motion to accept or adopt the housing production plan.
I'd make a motion that we adopt the housing production plan and forward it on to the state.
I would second that.
Okay, any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you all
Ian.
so much.
Thank you. You're very clear. Thank you so much. Okay, next is the planning board is getting ready for some, spring town meeting and cleaning up some of our bylaws. So, there's some proposed zoning bylaw amendments that are, listed in your packet. This vote, what we need to do is we need to refer this back to the planning board so that they can have a public hearing on this. So I would entertain a motion to refer the amendments back to the planning board for a public hearing.
Motion made.
Second.
Okay. Discussion. If we want to, provide comments to the planning board, we're not gonna do it now. We're gonna, the planning board, you're always welcome to attend the planning board's public hearing, which I think is gonna be the end of February 19th. You can always attend that, and if the board is amiable or would like to entertain, I'll add, this as an agenda item for our next board meeting, to go through this and pull together comments to provide to the planning board that they can use,
And that would be before the public hearing, correct?
at our next board meeting, which is
Would that be
February.
before the public
Yeah,
hearing?
this February 11th, I think, is our meeting. Let me look, hold on.
Sounds right.
11, yeah.
Yeah, 11th is our meeting and their public hearing is the 19th, so, but the planning board will, so this way the planning board will have their public hearing, they'll get our comments, and then they'll do it, and then they'll actually will come back to us for the warrant, so. I don't know if you're interested. So here, if you look at the letter, the cover letter that was provided from the planning board to us in your packet, the planning board hereby requests, by unanimous vote at a regularly scheduled meeting held on January 22nd, that the select board submit the following proposed bylaw amendments to the planning board for public hearing as required by Mass General Laws, Chapter 48, Section 5, in preparation for the spring 2025 annual town meeting to be held on April 22nd, 2025. The proposed amendments include revisions to certain bylaws as required for compliance with the state, FEMA, and EPA requirements, as well as revisions recommended as a part of the zoning recodification project that former planning director Martha Taylor has been working on with town council, planning board members, zoning board members, the building commissioner, the planning department, and other town staff over the past 6 months. This project has been identified as a priority goal in the planning department's annual work plan and budget detail for several years. As phase 1 of this effort, the planning board is proposing several zoning amendments for your consideration. We anticipate phase 2 of the project will bring more proposed zoning amendments at the next town meeting. So a summary of the proposed zoning amendments in this round 1, or phase 1 I'll call it, is an amendment to Article 1 under, this is all amendments to Chapter 97 zoning. So Article 1 is the language is recommended by town council to be included as the general provisions of the bylaw. So they're updating language. An amendment to Chapter 97, regulations of an overlay district with flood hazards. There's been updates to the flood hazard bylaw required by FEMA for the town to stay eligible for the National Flood Insurance Program, along with adoption of Newbury's new flood insurance rate map, which will become effective on July 8th. Town council, Mass DCR staff, and Newbury's floodplain administrator, the building commissioner, have provided the language and reviewed these amendments. So that's the second one. The third one is amendments to Chapter 97 zoning, Article 5, special permits in general. Section 97(5)A, language has been added to provide guidance and decision criteria for the granting of special permits. Section 97(5)C, open space residential development, language has been amended and added to clarify certain provisions of the bylaw. Along with the proposed bylaw edits, the planning board intends to review and update the OSRD regulations, which will be done through a public hearing process later this spring. Section 97.5D, there are common driveways. Language has been added and amended to clarify certain provisions of the bylaw regarding common driveway design, specifications, and application requirements. Section 97.5G, registered marijuana dispensaries and medical marijuana treatment centers. As recommended, Town Council, this section is proposed to be deleted and combined with Section 97.5H, marijuana establishments. Section 97H, marijuana establishments, section has been amended to include language related to medical marijuana treatment centers. In Article 9, Special Regulations, Section 97.9A, Site Plan Review, there's new language regarding pre-construction meetings has been added as recommended by the town's stormwater consultant for the town to stay compliant with the EPA MS4 stormwater regulations. In addition, new language is proposed by the planning board is to provide additional guidance for review and approval of projects requiring site plan review. Number 5 is Article 10, General Regulations, Section 9710C, Customary Home Occupations. Language has been added to clarify that uses which require a special permit under the table of use regulations cannot be permitted as a customary home occupation. Article 10, number 6, Article 10, General Regulations, Section 9710D, Accessory Apartments. As part of the Affordable Homes Act, passed by the Massachusetts Legislature in August of 2024, the construction of an accessory dwelling unit on a single-family lot must be allowed by right without the requirement of a special permit if it meets certain dimensional criteria. This law goes into effect February 3rd, 2025. In order to be compliant, the town must update its accessory department bylaw, originally adopted by town meeting in 2006. The proposed new section 9710D has been reviewed with the support of MVPC housing planners as well as town council and is intended to replace the town's existing bylaw. So this isn't an update, it's replace it. Number 7, Article 11, Administration. Town Council has recommended the addition of language regarding granting of building permits and granting of variances and amendments to written definitions. Warrant Article 20, request town meeting approval to update Board of Selectmen to Select Board throughout the zoning bylaw. That accurately reflects what this board is now named. Update bylaw to bylaw throughout zoning. Remove the hyphen between by and law. And to authorize the planning director to create a table of contents for zoning bylaw once all updates are made. In addition, town council has recommended an 8th warrant article accompanying these amendments, which would ask town meeting approval to change. Nope, that's the same thing. Okay, sorry. Change the Board of Selectmen to Select Board throughout the zoning. That I just read that, and that's. Thank you for consideration for this request. Contact Chris Whitty, who's here, or Kristen. So that's bylaws in a nutshell. Any questions?
Kind of a quick question of Arthur, because it kind of got a little mixed up with like EPA and velocity zones and what a local look at that can be. I mean, we're not setting out locally to change like the contour flood line or anything, right?
Well, that's,
Are we contour 10 now, or are we 12?
so that's the flood hazard maps
Yeah.
update.
Yeah,
So that's the, I don't know if you wanna.
Yeah, so basically,
to that.
this article is going to allow us to be compliant with FEMA's maps, so we have to you guys have to vote to accept those maps as well, because if we don't accept those maps, many of the homeowners won't be allowed to have the flood insurance anymore.
now did they increase the flood contour map?
Don't think the changes are too extensive. I haven't
I don't think so.
looked
I mean,
at
it's
them
not
too
like
closely.
contour 10 to contour 12 or something, right?
I don't think so. I don't know if they've changed the base flood elevation, quite honestly.
Okay, that's the thing that I'm, with the area of critical concern out there and everything else, when you start changing some of those baseline elevations for your floodplain, that gets serious.
I mean, they haven't changed the contours, so the ACEC is still contour 10.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions?
I just wanna, so you're gonna have a select board meeting where the planning board is we're gonna go through each of these like
Not with the
one by
planning
one?
board.
We're gonna feed our questions and
Provide
analysis
comments.
of what this is and have comments and submit that as a select board to the planning board.
Only if the board wants
As
to.
part of the public hearing, if that's what we wanna do.
Well, cause I mean, I can't absorb all of this
You don't have to,
in the moment.
right, you don't have to.
That's not tonight. I mean, it's-
We're gonna have a public.
Tonight's just,
Yeah, tonight's just to refer it back to them so they can have their public hearing as required by Massachusetts general laws.
We've done it before.
We do it every year, every time.
We'll have a public hearing on the 19th, correct?
Right, and there will be a presentation on each of these amendments and opportunity for questions and conversation.
But that being said, how would that affect the planning board's vote on adopting these have you guys already adopted these provisions?
No, this is all the process. The planning board is referring these amendments to the select board. Under statute, you have to refer them back to the planning board for public hearing. After that public hearing, the planning board will vote on which ones to recommend go on the spring town meeting. And the zoning amendments have to be adopted at town meeting.
So the
Well, it seems
planning
kind of a moot point that I'm referring this back to you,
That-
and then you're just gonna, and then you can vote on it.
No, they're gonna have a public hearing.
No, I know, but how, in the results of the public hearing, how is that gonna affect your vote?
Well, what will happen,
That's what I wanna know.
Martha, correct me if I'm wrong, what will happen is, once we vote to kick it back to them, they'll have their public hearing. They'll receive comments, if we decide to provide any, to them. And then the planning board will meet and discuss and go over these changes one by one. Then they'll vote each change to recommend it to the select board. It's a recommendation to the select board
To then go to the warrant.
for the warrant. Then we'll get it, and then we'll look through it, and then we may decide, we are the final decision maker, whether, what goes on the warrant and
What
what
goes on the
doesn't.
warrant.
Remember the one with the dogs that you caught?
And we do this all the time with everything.
I know, you don't have to tell me.
Yeah, well,
I just am
So-
having a really difficult time, referring this back to the planning board that's gonna go to a public hearing. And then the last ditch effort would be whether I wanna put it on the warrant or not.
The public hearing, Dana, might change the language in
Yeah.
that package. So
It's a
you
So that was
Process.
my question, how? How?
based on the
How
input,
would
from-
it?
based on the input from the public. Correct? Am I correct?
When is the public gonna get an opportunity to
February
absorb,
19th.
to absorb this
So-
package before the hearing?
Okay, why don't you take that?
So the legal advertisement for the public hearing is starting on the 3rd of February. So on the 3rd of February, those draft amendments go on the website for public reading.
And when is the public hearing?
The 19th of
19th of
February.
The 19th, so they're gonna get a couple of weeks
Exactly,
to be able to absorb this before they show up,
yes,
to have an educated
Discussion,
opinion about it.
right.
to participate, absolutely.
Any more questions?
No.
You good, Bill?
I'm good.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so. I lost my place. Here I am. Okay.
This one?
This one. Review and approve 2025 business license renewals. I have a common victualler for Kendall Bowie, Mad Martha's Island Cafe at 51 Norton Boulevard.
We're gonna go through each one, right?
No,
Huh?
you usually take them all and.
It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Do you want me to read them and we'll take them all with one vote? Is the board okay with that?
Are these all renewals?
Yeah. Renewals, yep, right? Joy?
My apologies, they apply to the town clerk. So
Okay.
I'm not familiar if they're renewals or,
Well, it says business license renewals, so.
Oh,
Well,
then-
you know what, we can tell because we'll know the businesses. So Mad Martha's, that's a renewal.
I know that, yep.
Yep. So general business, John B. Siemens, sculpture by Beverly Siemens at 2 Newman Road. General business automotive, subject to the restrictions and conditions of the special permit issued on 2/26/1986, and the variance issued on 11/17/1994 by the Newbury Zoning Board for the property at 24 Middle Road, Michael Morris, Schneller, BMW Performance at 26 Middle Road, Unit 1. General business, fuel storage delivery, Jeffrey Woodburn, Little River Realty Trust at 17 Newburyport Turnpike. General business, self-storage, Brendan Kelly, store yourself, storage at 12 Kent Way. Mobile coffee trailer, Michelle and Peter Abram by Coco at 12 Grove Street. Retail foods, Common Victular at. Vicular. And crafts, gifts,
Vittler,
Vittler.
yeah.
Matthew Kozaski, Tender Crop Farms at 108 High Road. These are all renewals.
I would make the motion to sign the renewal business licenses, certifications for 2025.
I will second that.
I have just a question. This has come up before about this, the variance issued in like 1994. Can anybody give me what is that about?
So there was a special permit issued on February 26, 1986, and there was an additional variance issued on November 17th, 1994, that put restrictions, it was done by the Newbury Zoning Board, to put restrictions on 24 Middle Road. So his license, his business license is subject to those restrictions. Martha, did I say that correctly?
Yes.
And is that because it's not zoned business?
Because they have a variance. They have a special permit and they have a variance.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, old business, Colonial Power Group. National Grid, so National Grid has set its rates, I think it was, I'm gonna ask Joy to speak to this. February 1st, 2024 through July 31st, 2025. The rates were secured for the town of Newbury with 2 alternative greener options available to participating residents. So Joy, I'm gonna turn it over to you.
so Colonial Power shared with us National Grid's notice of the proposed fixed basic service rates for the period of February 1 through July 31st for the area. That includes the town of Newbury. That rate will be 14.672 cents. So through community power aggregation, it behooved us to wait for that rate to come out. So we know what National Grid's rate would be, so we could make sure that we beat that rate. So through community power aggregation, municipalities have the option to offer to their constituents a single aggregate rate or multiple aggregate rates. So that the multiple would be for the consumers who want more say in what kind of power that they're actually buying. So having recently been awarded the Green Community designation, it seemed appropriate for Newbury to offer 3 aggregate rates. So the first rate is an in-kind match to that which National Grid offers. So this meets the state's mandatory requirement for green energy. That rate will be 12.81 cents. So this is the product that town residents will be enrolled into if they do nothing during the opt-out window. And I'll touch on that a little bit more in a moment. The second option exceeds the Massachusetts mandatory requirement for green energy and actually provides 100% green energy, but it's derived from wind projects outside of New England states. That rate, if residents want to choose that a separate rate because it's a greater green energy, is 12.91 cents. The third option marries the increase of green energy, local New England energy providers, and still beats the national grid rate, called Mass Class 1 RECs, increases the green energy provided under the basic mandatory minimum by 25%, and again is provided by New England providers. That rate is 13.87 cents. So the approximate 18 mil difference between the national grid rate and the Newbury Community Power Aggregates in-kind match will be approximately $11.70 per month cost saving for customers. So obviously I need to stress that power pricing is based on factors that are well above my understanding. That's why this is only intended to be a brief update to the board. Colonial Power is gonna begin preparing their educational materials, preparing their opt-out mailers that will be mailed directly to each Newbury resident. And they're also gonna schedule information sessions in late February and early March to help answer additional questions. This January contract date means Newbury's on track to launch our aggregation program in April of this year. So as Colonial Power makes educational materials available, we'll continue to update the dedicated webpage on the Town of Newbury website.
Great. Any questions?
Good explanation, I think.
I think.
Is any of this gonna be retro? In other words, when we can opt in, if we opt in, do we get to pick one of these options that you just talked about, correct?
If they want to, yes.
And if we pick the lower of National Grid, will the electricity that I'm burning like today revert back to that price? No, so there's no retro savings
No.
in this.
And again, it behooved us to wait so that we could get the national
I
grid
understand
rate,
that,
so.
yeah.
Now, is this kind of an explanation for the fact that when we didn't return in the mail, the fact that we wanted to opt out, we were already opt out at that point, but we're really
That
not
hasn't-
opt out?
That hasn't happened yet.
That's what I meant, so we're really not opt out.
You're opted in automatically.
That's what I meant, but we're really not opted in or anything because they haven't
Not
chosen
yet.
It
us
hasn't
to be
rolled out
opted
yet.
anyway.
Right.
Not yet.
So we're still.
Program hasn't started yet.
It's
We're still
coming.
in limbo.
It's coming.
Coming. So that's good. So National Grid came up with its rate at 14.672 cents. And the aggregate can beat it at 12.81. And for the little bit higher, if you want greener energy, you can have two other greener options. So that's kind of cool.
Does anyone have the rate?
You can pay that carbon emission fee if you want to.
Does anyone have the 14.6 that is going to be after February, whatever? Does anyone know what that is now?
Oh, I don't know what it is now.
I'd
Yeah,
be
you
curious.
can look on your energy bill, on your
Yeah, I was just
electric
curious to
bill.
see what it is now.
So anybody, so what will happen, I just wanna, cause we're on TV, I wanna just reiterate one more time, what's gonna happen is you're gonna be getting something in the mail and you have a choice. If your default is National Grid, that's how you default to get your energy from. Not the distribution, not all of that stuff, it's the actual power, I forget what it's called.
Per kilowatt hour.
Yeah, it's the generation of the power. National Grid's their prices are gonna be 14.672 cents. When we roll this aggregate out, you're gonna automatically shift back to the 12.81 unless you opt out. If you have a private provider separate to National Grid, you will not roll back onto this. They can't. You're under a contract with them. So there's people that follow this, that know what they're doing, and I believe there's quite a few of them. So, but this will be good because of our residents that don't opt out, they're gonna get a reduction of about $11 a month in their electric bill.
It's a glass of
that's
wine.
Well, it's helpful. It's better than going the other way.
It's not February 1st yet, Dana.
drive you. Okay, so that's, thank you, Joy. I think everybody's clear on that, right?
Yep.
Town administrators report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So Monday morning, you may have noticed a little shaking and quaking here in the town. USGS National Earthquake Information Center reported that at approximately 10:22, a 3.9 magnitude earthquake was detected near York Harbor, Maine. Several residents did contact the PD, fire station, town hall, noting that they felt the impacts of the earthquake. So any residents that have any significant damage resultant of the quake are urged to contact our emergency management director, Chief Fisher. Chief Evans is here with us this evening. Congratulations to the chief. He recently graduated from the Fire Chief Officer Management Training Program. Extremely competitive, highly demanding leadership and management program, and
Bravo.
Congratulations, Chief.
Well done for that. Thank you.
we also have a firefighter job opening right now that's been posted internally at the moment. And paramedic preferred, correct? Yep. So hopefully we'll get that filled quickly. Orchard Street Culvert Replacement Project, the culvert's in, the water main's attached, temporary paving is complete. Roadway was opened on Friday with only one lane crossing over the bridge. You'll see stop signs on both sides. Just a reminder that they still need to close the roadway again in the spring for about a week for the final paving, loaming, seeding, and the likes.
Are they gonna flare out that bump?
Yes.
Is that's?
Dukes of
Yes.
a Hazzard.
Yes.
Okay. So that is gonna be like
Oh, yes.
flared in, okay.
Oh, yeah.
Gotcha,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yep.
I'm sure the public.
This is just a
is
temporary
curious to kn-
opening, yep.
Right,
Yep, DPW is still looking for plow drivers. You may have noticed in your inboxes, you've received conflict of interest law training. You have 30 days to complete that, and once you've got your, you passed your examination, they'll send you a little certificate. And you can just turn that into the town clerk's office.
Was that in this pack this week or the week before?
In your inbox.
It's an
In your
email.
inbox, in your
Oh,
email.
okay.
Yeah,
I thought-
in your
okay.
email. And the IT director is making appointments for the email upgrades. You can contact Joy to schedule a time that's convenient for you. We'll be doing, I don't know what the date of the actual change is. It's early February, right?
It's my understanding the change will actually take place on Monday.
Oh, Monday,
And, but that there will be a little bit of overlap, so
between the two.
the old email addresses will still exist with a auto-generated notice to recipients that we are changing. So if there are people who you forget to contact, they'll know that we're changing over to .gov from .org, and to make that amendment on their end. So hopefully that will fill in all the gaps.
Yes. And we also received a notification from Whittier. They certified their E&D or excess and deficiency funds at $1,209,898.
Thank you.
how was that compared to last year?
I don't have last year's number.
That's okay, I know I've asked you these
I think
questions.
it's about the same. I think it is about.
Well, typically, I know, typically it's about a 10% increase even for Triton, which is, I don't know how we're gonna make that sustainable, but.
No, that's their excess and deficiency.
Excess and deficiency.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry, that wasn't their operating
No,
no, no.
budget to us, okay, never
No,
mind.
that's their free
Sorry.
cash.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's-
yeah,
that's
yeah,
their free
yeah, okay,
cash.
sorry.
I think it was about the same last year, roughly, close enough.
I can find out and let you know.
That's all right. Okay, so under correspondence, we did receive a letter from the town of, from Xfinity to the town of Newbury, a programming advisory. It's part of our ongoing commitment to keep you and our customers informed about changes to Xfinity TV series. We wanted to update you that Comcast's right to continue carrying Fuse TV HD and FM HD expired at 8:59 PM Eastern Time on December 31st, 2024. As a result, absent a renewal of the agreement, we are not currently authorized to carry HD and FM HD as part of our lineup. In your area, in our area, the change will impact the following channels: Fuse HD, channel 1414, and FM HD, channel 1638. Reach out to Kerry Morris, the senior manager at Comcast, if you have any questions.
And they're gonna go up on the prices again.
It's always do. Okay, so review and approve meeting minutes. There's draft meeting minutes. I'd like to entertain a motion to approve the draft meeting minutes of January 6th, 2025.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Approve draft meeting minutes on January 14th, 2025.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Warrants, motion to sign warrants.
Motion to sign warrants.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. No executive session, motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.